So look at Anthony Ryder from South Lyon, Michigan, recently selected as the Lions 2020 Fan of the Year. He has a passion about sports broadcasting.
With the 112th selection in the 2021 NFL Draft, the Detroit Lions select Amon-Ra St. Brown, wide receiver, USC. One pride, baby! Yeah! What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another Detroit Lions video. Now, the NFL trade deadline has come and gone. The Detroit Lions did end up making a trade, trading a 2025 sixth-round pick for wide receiver Donovan Peoples-Jones, bringing him back to Michigan and bringing him in to be a playmaker for this Detroit Lions offense that already ranks top 5 in the NFL in scoring. But one thing they didn't do, and one thing that a lot of Lions fans wanted them to accomplish at the trade deadline, was to go out and get a little bit more defensive help, go out and get a second edge rusher, go out and get an extra depth cornerback just in case. And the Lions ended up not doing so. They ended up staying put. And while teams like the San Francisco 49ers and Chicago Bears traded for guys like Chase Young and Montez Sweat, respectively, the Detroit Lions stayed put, didn't add to their pass rush, and a lot of fans were very upset by this. A lot of fans felt like the Detroit Lions need that second-tier pass rusher next to Aiden Hutchinson to really unlock the defensive line as a whole. And even though the Detroit Lions lead the NFL in pressures, they are very middle of the road when it comes to sacks and finishing plays, and many fans felt like there was a piece missing to this defensive line that wasn't acquired at the trade deadline. But I think that a lot of fans are overlooking some of the draft picks that Detroit has. Right, I think that some people are overlooking the impact of these young players and the impact that they've had over the last couple of weeks as a reason as to why Brad Holmes didn't decide to go out and trade big assets for a big-time pass rusher. Guys like Josh Paschal, guys like Julian Okwara, guys like James Houston, who are set to return in 3 to 4 weeks for the Detroit Lions, can bring that extra pass rushing, can bring that asset of finishing plays on the defensive side of the ball to the Detroit Lions and add that little bit of extra pass rush they seem to be missing versus some of the top offensive lines they've played this year. But one guy I think a lot of people are overlooking, largely due to the injuries he suffered early in his career, is Josh Paschal, the former second-round pick and the former alumni of the Kentucky Wildcats. Josh Paschal was brought in with pretty high expectations by Dan Campbell and his coaching staff, and even though he's only played in 13 games and hasn't necessarily exploded on the stat sheet, I think Josh Paschal is one of the most underrated players on this Detroit Lions defense, and now that he's finally healthy, playing in his 4th game of the year against the Chargers in 2 Sundays from now, he has been very impactful in the 3 games that he's played, and he has been really the complement that we've been looking for Aiden Hutchinson, even though the stats might not show it. So let's take a look at Josh Paschal. They take a look at what he does well for this team, what he's doing for this team to open up Aiden Hutchinson and the rest of this defensive line, and talk about whether or not it was the right decision to pass on an extra pass rusher in return for more snaps for Josh Paschal. And of course, as we said earlier, Julian Okwara and James Houston will factor into this as well. But today, we're going to take a look solely at the former second-round pick. So, Josh Paschal, a second-round pick out of the University of Kentucky, a player that was drafted to be the complement to Aiden Hutchinson, but unfortunately has suffered some injuries early in his career. He played week 1 versus the Kansas City Chiefs in 2023, had a hamstring injury that put him on IR, and he returned versus the Raiders. He returned versus the Ravens in week 7, and of course played on Monday night versus the Raiders in week 8. As a rookie, he played in 10 of his 16 possible games and was pretty good, but didn't again show up on the stat sheet other than a couple of games where he had half a sack versus the Jacksonville Jaguars and 2 sacks versus the Chicago Bears. He really didn't have any major statistical standout games, but he shows up in a lot of ways that aren't going to be seen on the stat sheet. He shows up on film a lot more than he shows up on the stat sheet, and that's what we're going to be taking a look at today. But speaking of that stat sheet, in 13 total games of his career so far, Josh Paschal has totaled 24 tackles, 3 tackles for loss, 4 quarterback hits, and 2 sacks. Not a bad display for the rookie, but of course, a player that was drafted to be an edge rusher. He kind of plays an interior-exterior role where sometimes he jumps inside, sometimes he jumps outside, but he has a lot more pressures than he does sacks. Again, kind of that inability to finish plays, but he has been very impactful. Taking a look at what he does well for this team, things that aren't going to show up, he draws a lot of double teams, especially against the Raiders on Monday Night Football. Josh Paschal was actually the guy being double teamed a lot of the time, right? He had either a tackle and a guard on him. When he jumped inside, he had a guard in the center on him. There were times where it was the left tackle and the running back, Josh Jacobs, chipped him a lot. There was a time where he was double teamed and chipped by Josh Jacobs, and that opened up a lot of opportunities for Aiden Hutchinson to go one-on-one versus the right tackle of the Las Vegas Raiders, and allowed him to get 5 or 6 pressures, allowed him to get 2 or 3 quarterback hits, and affected the quarterback in numerous ways, despite the sacks not quite showing up on the stat sheet. Josh Paschal directly impacted that game where Aiden Hutchinson was able to get those 2 to 3 quarterback hits, affect multiple throws. And again, even though the stats might not say that the sacks showed up, right? Even though Aiden Hutchinson didn't walk away with 2 or 3 sacks from Monday Night Football, he had 2 or 3 impactful plays where he hit the quarterback early, forced an errant throw, and forced an incompletion, or just straight up hit the quarterback and, obviously made him feel that pressure to force incompletions and force big plays for the defense. That is the role that Josh Paschal has, and that is what allowed Aiden Hutchinson to have a quietly good night on Monday Night Football versus the Raiders, and even versus the Ravens, going up against a guy like Ronnie Stanley, who is one of the better left tackles in the NFL. He played really well. He was double teamed in that game as well, but contained the edge really well on Lamar Jackson, forced him over to Aiden Hutchinson's side. And Aiden Hutchinson, I would say, versus the Ravens, probably had his worst day as a Detroit Lion through his first 2 seasons, pretty much in his entire career. But Josh Paschal forced Lamar Jackson to that side, gave Aiden Hutchinson plenty of time and plenty of opportunities to make plays in that game, and that was the compliment that we've been looking for Aiden Hutchinson. Josh Paschal has been setting the edge very well in the run game. His motor is incredibly high, goes right along with Aiden Hutchinson as 2 of the hardest working players on that defensive line, and his ability to contain the quarterback is really good for this defense that has allowed a lot of scrambles, that has allowed a lot of quarterbacks to escape the pocket and hurt us with his legs. Josh Paschal contains the quarterback really well, forces him back into the pocket, and yeah, sometimes they still escape, but for the most part, Josh Paschal does his part to keep the quarterback in the pocket, push them towards Aiden Hutchinson, our biggest playmaker on the defensive side of the ball, and really allows Aiden Hutchinson to get one-on-one opportunities like we've been asking for from that second-tier pass rusher. So he's doing everything that we want Chase Young to do. He's doing everything we wanted Montez Sweat to do if that was the trade that came through, right? But he's not quite finishing the plays. He's not quite going against, or not quite having the statistical standout that you want to see from that edge rusher too. But again, that doesn't mean he's not being impactful. Taking a look at some of the matchups he's had this year, he's played in 3 games. And the Chiefs game, he played primarily on the interior, but did play a little bit on the right side as well. And versus the Ravens and the Raiders, he's played exclusively on the outside due to more depth on the inside. Wanted to get some rookies, some young guys, some looks. They gave Josh Paschal pretty much the go-ahead to rotate with Julian and Romeo Okwara on the right side of that pass rush. So in week 1, he went up primarily against Joe Thuney and Jawan Taylor, 2 players that are very highly paid in the NFL and guys that get paid a lot of money to protect the quarterback. They both have played very well. I believe Creed Humphrey has given up 0 sacks this year, and I believe that Jawan Taylor has given up just 2 sacks this year. And you know what? Josh Paschal actually won quite a few battles versus those guys. In week 7, he went up against Ronnie Stanley, again, one of the better offensive tackles in this league. And although Ronnie Stanley won the day, Josh Paschal had several reps where he either pressured Lamar Jackson, pushed Ronnie Stanley back into the lap of Lamar Jackson, and really affected Lamar's ability to move in the pocket. And then, of course, on Monday night versus the Las Vegas Raiders, going up primarily against Colton Miller, he played really well. Colton Miller, again, I think one of the more underrated tackles in this league, only has allowed 2 sacks through almost 500 snaps this year. He had quite a few wins. Yeah, Colton Miller won some battles, but Josh Paschal went right at him. So playing 3 really good tackles and an all-pro caliber guard, Josh Paschal has played really good competition and still looked relatively solid, still helped the team in many, many ways, and had the ability to create pressure, had the ability to show the ability to force the quarterback off his spot, and really just showed up big for the Detroit Lions when they needed him. Now, the Detroit Lions, the key for Josh Paschal here is going to be staying healthy, right? He's only played in 13 games. In this season, he's only played 53 snaps through 3 games. He is a player that has been rotated in and out, a player that they're bringing along relatively slowly. He played, I believe, actually quite a few snaps as a rookie when he was healthy, but this year, even when he's healthy, he's only playing 53 snaps through 3 games, which isn't bad. That's splits about a third, 33, 35% of snaps for the defense so far this year, but he's been impactful on all of those plays. So as he continues to get healthier, as he continues to get back into football shape, and hopefully as he starts to play some of the weaker offensive lines on the exterior, because let's be real, going against Ronnie Stanley, Colton Miller, and Jawan Taylor to start your 3 games of your NFL season, really, you're probably not going to produce very much in the NFL. But going forward, right, producing in some of the lesser offensive linemen, right, next year, or next week when they play the Chargers on Monday Night Football, or Sunday Night Football, is probably not going to be very good because you're likely going against Rashawn Slater, I believe, if he is still healthy. So that's going to be another all-pro caliber tackle he's going to have to contend with. But eventually, you're going to start seeing some weaker offensive lines. You're going to start seeing the Bears. You're going to start seeing some of the other lesser teams in the NFC. And I think that's where you're going to start seeing Josh Paschal at the latter end of this year start to get those tackles for loss again, start to get those sacks back on the board, start to be more impactful on the stat sheet while still remaining just as impactful on the field as he has been for his entire 13-game career. So with that being said, is Josh Paschal the guy? Is Josh Paschal that number 2 edge rusher that's going to help Aiden Hutchinson, that's going to turn this defensive line around? Well, I think that there's a good chance. They got quite a few pressures in week 1 when he played versus a great Kansas City offensive line. He was actually, I believe, led the team in pressures in week 7 versus the Baltimore Ravens. Had a couple of tackles very close to the line of scrimmage where it wasn't sacked, but it was a 1-yard gain that without Josh Paschal would have turned into a 5, 6, 7, or even bigger gain for the Baltimore Ravens. So he contained Lamar Jackson several times. He had a really good day versus Kansas City. And then last night, again, he didn't necessarily show up big on the stat sheet, didn't necessarily have a big game-breaking play, but being double teamed, being chipped consistently, doing a lot of the dirty work allowed Aiden Hutchinson to get 3 hits on the quarterback and force several incomplete passes, including that incomplete pass that if Jimmy Garoppolo had thrown it well out of the end zone could have been a huge play for the Raiders. Those pressures, those hits were directly related to Josh Paschal eating up those blocks, taking on those double teams, taking off and being chipped by the running back. And he did a great job filling that role for the Detroit Lions and playing the role he's been asked to do. So I think Josh Paschal can be that edge rusher too. I think certainly if you rotate him in with Julian Okwara and James Houston when they're healthy, that is a decent trio of pass rushers who are going to do different things for you, right? Obviously, you're going to play Josh Paschal on early downs. He's going to be your run stopper. He's going to be the guy that eats up those blocks. And then you're going to bring in Julian Okwara. You're going to bring in James Houston as your speed rushers, your guys that are going to potentially be free blitzers. And if not, they're going to be able to bend around the edge and be more of those pass rush versatile guys. And I think as a trio, they are going to complement Aiden Hutchinson really, really well, but it's all going to start with big number 93. So I do believe this is why the Detroit Lions didn't make a trade for an edge rusher. I think they see Josh Paschal coming along to where they want. They see Julian Okwara improving, has 2 sacks in the last 2 games, and they see James Houston is going to return in a month or so, and they think, hey, that trio, especially going into the playoffs, if healthy, can complement Aiden Hutchinson, can complement our defensive line, right? When James Houston is healthy and they have a good rotation there with him and Julian Okwara, and of course Romeo Okwara as well, they can kick Josh Paschal back inside where I thought he looked even better versus the Kansas City Chiefs than on the edge. So there's going to be a lot of rotation on this offensive line once they get healthy, but I do think Josh Paschal is going to be a huge part of this defensive line. It's going to be a huge part of the pressure that they get and has been a pretty big part in the league's leading defensive line in terms of pressure. So with all that being said, that is all I have for you guys today. Let me know down in the comments below, how do you feel about Josh Paschal? Do you think he's going to be that edge rusher too? Do you think he can take that next step to be the sole complement to Aiden Hutchinson? Or you still think the Lions maybe should have made a splash trade for an edge rusher too? I'm very curious what you guys have to say. But with all that being said, that is all for you guys today. Thank you all so much for watching. And until next time, and as always, go Lions.